Hello, team players. It's time for part 2 of my domain tier list. Let's dive in. Okay, some of you guys have asked me to put a graph on here as to where I'm putting these domains. That is going to be somewhere in this video, so stick around and watch the entire thing. Last time we ended with the dust domain, so it's time for the duty domain. Our first focus spell for this domain is Oathkeeper's Insignia. For a free action, when you make a promise or deal, you create some sort of trinket. This spell can last anywhere from 1 hour to 1 year, depending on what rank you cast it at. If during the duration you complete the terms of your promise or deal, the charm fades away with a pleasant chime. If you violate the terms instead, it breaks with a dissonant crash. This focus spell gets a D. It is definitely an out-of-combat spell, but all it really does is let people know that you keep your promises. Which, don't get me wrong, can be useful for making allies, but it doesn't do anything for the actual team. Dutiful Challenge, on the other hand, is a decent spell. Target one creature within 30 feet. That creature takes a -1 status penalty to attack rolls, damage rolls, and skill checks against anyone other than you. And you take the same penalty against creatures other than the target of this spell. Each time a creature other than you uses a hostile action against the target of this spell, the target gets a will saving throw. On a success, the target no longer takes the penalty against that creature. You can dismiss this spell, but it automatically ends when you or the target are defeated. This is a really good focus spell for War Priest Clerics. And champions who happen to have domains, because champions can get domains as well. Basically, if you want enemies to attack you instead of your allies, this is the spell you want to pick up, as this gives them a big incentive to attack you and not other people. But this spell is really designed for a one-on-one fight. If there are other enemies on the battlefield that your allies can attack, then this spell is fantastic. But if you're only facing one enemy, this spell isn't great. Which is why I'm giving this spell a B. Overall, I'm giving the duty domain a C. Oathkeeper's Insignia is good for getting allies, but that's about it. But Dutiful Challenge is good. So I'm giving this one a middle-of-the-road ranking. Okay, we're done with the D domains. Now it's time for the 1E domain with the Earth domain. Hurtling Stone allows you to conjure a magical stone and throw it at a creature up to 60 feet away. This requires a spell attack roll against the target's AC. This deals bludgeoning damage and can push the target up to 20 feet in any direction, depending on whether you succeed or critically succeed. The only reason I'm giving this spell a B is because of that push, as that is a way to make enemies waste an action. Pushing a target is forced movement, so it doesn't trigger reaction. Overall, decent spell, but could be better. Our second domain spell, Localized Quake, also gets a B. You can choose for this spell to be a 15-foot emanation or a 15-foot cone. Each creature on the ground in the area takes bludgeoning damage with a basic reflex saving throw. Any creature that fails their saving throw is also knocked prone. This spell can be really good, because it does damage and can knock enemies prone. However, you do have to be careful about when and where you cast this spell. It is every creature in the area, not just enemies. So if you're not careful, you could screw over your allies as well with this spell. Overall, I'm giving Earth Domain a B. It's got good spells, they're just a little situational. Now it's time to talk about one of my new favorite domains that I found out about while researching this video, the Family Domain. Soothing Words allows you to target one ally within 30 feet. For the next minute, that ally gains a +1 bonus on will saving throws. This bonus is +2 against emotion effects. Also, when you cast this spell, you can attempt to counteract one emotion effect on the target. Emotion effects are a lot more common than you think they are, especially fear. So this one definitely gets an A. It is only will saving throws, which is why it doesn't get an A+. But you'll be glad you have this spell. when the barbarian gets frightened and really needs to hit a target. Next, we've got another awesome spell with Unity. As a reaction, if you and one or more allies are targeted by a spell or ability that allows a saving throw, and the allies are within 30 feet of you, each of those allies can use your saving throw modifier instead of their own on that saving throw. Each ally individually decides whether to use your saving throw modifier or their own. This spell would be downright ridiculous on a monk. But even if you're not, you'll be glad you have this spell when you have a high reflex saving throw and everybody gets hit by a fireball. Definitely an A spell here. Family definitely gets an A as a domain. We've had a couple of really good domains so far, but unfortunately for the next one we gotta go down again with the Fate domain. With Read Fate, you target one creature other than you. You attempt to determine the target's fate in the next day, or an hour or less if the target is likely to have multiple rapid experiences, such as someone adventuring. You learn a single word that is connected to that creature's fate within that time frame. The word isn't always meant to be taken at face value. The GM rolls a secret DC 6 flat check. If the target's fate is too inconclusive, or on a failed check, you get the result of inconclusive. Either way, the target is immune to this spell for the next 24 hours. This one gets a C. You only get a single word, and the GM can be extremely cryptic about it. And you might get inconclusive as well. In my opinion, most of the time, this spell isn't going to give you much. So yeah, definitely a C spell here. Next we've got Tempt Fate. As a reaction, if you or an ally within 120 feet make a saving throw, you can give that ally a +1 bonus on that saving throw. However, if you roll a success, you get a critical success, but if you roll a failure, you get a critical failure. And this critical failure can't be reduced by abilities that normally reduce critical failure. If the triggering ability does not have a critical success and critical failure effect, then Tempt Fate fails, but you don't spend the focus point for this spell. This spell can be really great, but it's also extremely risky. If you use the spell on someone, you could make it so that they don't take anything, or you could straight up kill them, depending on how they roll. As such, I have to give this one a C. Used in the right situation, it can be useful, but it's way too risky for me to give it anything higher than. This domain does have an apocryphal spell called String of Fate. You target yourself and one ally within 60 feet. You can sustain this spell for up to 1 minute. Whenever both you and the ally would both be required to make a saving throw against the same effect, and one of you succeeds and the other critically fails, you can choose to both fail. You and the ally must both agree to take the effects of the failure effect. Otherwise, you both use what you rolled. This is another C. It's good, but it requires, number one, that you and the ally are subject to the same effect, which if you're 60 feet apart, that's not likely. And number two, it requires one of you to regularly succeed and the other to critically fail. There's no other combination that works for this spell. So if you critically succeed and your ally critically fails, you don't get to use this spell. Not a good spell here. Fate gets a C. Its spells are just way too situational. Okay, next is the Fire domain. With Fire Ray, you can target one creature within 60 feet and make a spell attack roll against their AC. This spell, of course, deals fire damage. On any result other than a critical failure, the target square lights on fire, dealing 1d6 fire damage to any creature that ends its turn in one of those squares. This lasts until the start of your next turn. If you've been with this channel for a long time, you know how I feel about spells that just do damage. So it should come as no surprise, and I'm giving this spell a C. The only way that this spell helps the team is by hitting fire weaknesses. Which again, fire resistances are just as common. Next we've got Flame Barrier. As a reaction, if you or an ally within 60 feet will be targeted by an effect that deals fire damage, you can grant the target of this spell resistance 15 against that damage. Another situational spell. Fire damage is kind of common, but not really. So, I mean, this spell is good when you can actually use it, but whether you can use it or not depends on what you're facing. So this one also gets a C. The apocryphal spell for this domain is Cinder Gaze. To cast this spell, you must spend 1 minute next to a fire. Any fire of any size. When you complete the spell, roll 1d4. You gain one of the following effects for 10 minutes or until you use it. +2 on your next initiative roll. The next time you take damage, you gain temporary hit points equal to 1 plus your spellcasting modifier before you take the damage. Roll twice and take the better result on a recall knowledge check. Or the next time you make a saving throw, roll twice and take the better result. All these effects are really good in the right situation. But because this spell only lasts for 10 minutes, or until you use the effect of the one you get, and relies on luck to determine which effect you get, makes me give this spell a B. It's good, but situational. Overall, though, I have to give Fire a C. The apocryphal spell from this domain can be really good, but the two spells you're probably going to end up getting aren't that great. The freedom domain, however, is actually pretty good. First, we've got Unimpeded Stride. For one action, you can immediately escape from any effect that has you immobilized or grabbed, unless the effect has a higher rank than this spell. You can then stride. During this movement, you ignore any difficult terrain or anything that would reduce your speed. This one is really, really good, especially for cloistered clerics. The last thing most spellcasters want is to get grappled. And this just says, oh, you grabbed me? Well, guess what? I'm out now. And even gets you away from the person who grappled you. Unfortunately, this spell does have some downsides. Number one, the stride still triggers reactions. Which means if the enemy that grabbed you has reactive strike, it gets it. In addition, this spell only works on you, nobody else. But this spell is great action economy, and you don't even have to roll to escape, which is why this spell gets an overall B+. And with Word of Freedom, you can target one creature within 30 feet. You suppress one of the following conditions on that target: confused, frightened, grabbed, paralyzed, or restrained. The target isn't affected by that condition for 1 round. If you chose grabbed or restrained, the target automatically breaks free. However, if you don't remove the effect that caused the condition, then the condition returns when this spell ends. For example, if a spell made the target confused for 1 minute, you can suppress it for 1 round, but after that it comes back. This spell gets an A. Absolutely. It works on any creature within 30 feet of you, which is amazing, and works extremely well against grabbed and restrained conditions. The fact that this spell allows the target to automatically escape grabs and restraints means that enemies have to re-grapple them, wasting an action. And even with the other conditions, suppressing them for a round can be a big deal, especially that frightened condition. Overall, Freedom Domain gets a B+. This is the domain you want to pick up if enemies are grappling you a lot. Okay, time to talk about the Glyph domain. Starting with Redact. When you cast this spell, give one proper name and target one piece of written material. Any mention of that name in the written material that you targeted is blurred, smudged, or otherwise completely illegible. Epithets and unambiguous references are also redacted. For example, removing references to Serenray would also remove references to her title, the Dawnflower. Hiding this spell allows it to last longer, and you can replace the name you chose with a different name. This one gets a C. Honestly, there's very few situations where this would be useful. If you wanted to give false information to someone, this is a good way to do it. Otherwise, though, you're not going to use this spell very much. So yeah, C. And then we have Ghostly Transcription. Target one creature within 30 feet. For the next minute, anytime that creature speaks, whatever it speaks is spelled out in ghostly words as well. This also works if the target simply mouths the word. You can also choose whether the words are visible to everyone or just creatures you specify. Furthermore, as long as the glyphs are visible to everyone, the target's auditory effects affect the target even if no sound carries in the area. This one gets a C+. It's good, but only in certain situations. For example, if you need to stealth and still talk, this is an excellent way to do that. This is also a fantastic spell to use if the enemy has a silence spell up, or if you know that the enemy you're facing is deaf. But it's only good in those situations, otherwise it's basically completely useless. Overall, Glyph gets a C. These spells are only good in situations you're not going to run into very often. Now it's time for me to talk about another one of my favorite domains, the Healing Domain. With Healer's Blessing, for one action, you can target one willing living creature within 30 feet. For the next minute, anytime that creature would gain hit points from a Healing Vitality spell, it heals an additional 2 hit points per rank of this spell. However, this spell can only heal a target once per spell, even if the target is hit with something like the Regenerate spell. This spell is a fantastic way of making lower rank heal spells actually worth it, especially at high levels. Cast this and then a 2-action heal spell and you're sitting pretty. And it lasts for a minute, so you can keep using heal spells on the target and they'll still heal more hit points. Fantastic spell, highly recommend it. This one definitely gets an A. And then of course we have Rebuke Death. This is one of those spells that can be cast with anywhere from 1 to 3 actions. It targets one living creature per action you take on the spell within a 20-foot emanation. Each target heals 3d6 hit points. In addition, if you use this spell on a target that has the dying condition, they do not increase their wounded condition. This spell is insane. It can literally bring a party back from the brink of death, which can be huge in boss fights. Or even that encounter that should have been easy, but ended up not being. If you're a cloistered cleric of Serenray, or a similar deity, this is a domain you definitely want to pick up. A+ here. Overall, Healing Domain in my book gets an A. If you want to be a good healer and you have access to domains, this is one you want to pick up. Next, we've got another fantastic domain with the Indulgence domain. Overstuff allows you to target one living creature within 30 feet who must make a Fortitude saving throw. On a successful saving throw, the target is sickened 1, but can spend an action retching to automatically get rid of the condition. On a failure, the target is sickened 1, and on a critical failure, they're sickened 2. This spell is one of the best focus spells you could ever ask for, as it sickens the target on a successful saving throw. Granted, they can spend an action to automatically succeed in getting rid of the check, but that wastes an action. Sicken is one of the rarest and most debilitating conditions you can put on an enemy. The only problem with this spell is that it requires a Fortitude saving throw. Unfortunately, a lot of enemies have high Fortitude save, but I'm still giving this spell an A-. It's still really good. The second spell for this domain is Take Its Course. You can touch one creature, and if it's an enemy, you can force them to make a will saving throw. This spell attempts to progress one disease affliction, one poison affliction, or persistent poison damage. Choose one of the following effects. If you choose an affliction, you can make the target make its next saving throw against that affliction. You also grant the target a +2 bonus or a -2 penalty to that saving throw. If you choose persistent poison damage, you can make the target take that persistent poison damage immediately upon casting this spell. Whether or not you do so, the target gets to make another flat check against that persistent poison damage. You can set the DC of the flat check to 5 or 20 instead of the normal DC. This spell is really good for getting rid of these conditions on your allies. and it can be useful if enemies are afflicted by these conditions. However, this spell does have its downsides. Number 1, it's hard to use on enemies because it's a touch spell. Secondly, if you do use it on enemies, you're giving them a chance to get rid of the condition. Overall, Take Its Course gets a B. It's good, but it can be a little situational. And it's basically completely useless if nobody is afflicted by disease or poison. Lastly, the Indulgence domain does have an apocryphal spell, Frenzied Revelry. This spell targets a 5-foot emanation around you. For 1 minute, you and all allies in the area gain a +1 status bonus to saving throws against mental effects. In addition, whenever somebody critically succeeds at a save against the mental effects, it also gains a +1 bonus to attack and damage roll. This spell is also really good. People do have to critically succeed on their saving throw to get the offensive bonus. However, a +1 bonus on saving throws against all mental effects is pretty huge. The only problem with this spell is that it starts as a pretty small area. And while the area does increase as you heighten it, the spell doesn't heighten very well. I'm still giving this spell an A, just not an A+. But the Indulgence domain overall gets an A-. 2 of its spells are really good, and one of them is good, but kind of situational. Now, of course, we gotta go down a little bit with the Introspection domain. With Guided Introspection, you can target one creature within 30 feet and give it a +1 status bonus on saving throws against emotion and fear effects for 1 minute. Also, if the target would become confused, you can reduce that duration by 1 round to a minimum of 1 round. If the target would become frightened or stupefied, you can reduce that condition by 1 to a minimum of 1. However, once any of these conditions occur, the spell ends. This spell is good, as emotion and fear effects are common. However, the confused condition isn't common at all, and neither is the stupefied condition. Plus, stupefied does very little to hinder martial character. So the second half of this spell isn't all that useful. So Guided Introspection gets a B. It's good, but you won't use that second effect very often. Then we've got Confront Selves. Target one creature within 30 feet and force them to make a will saving throw. Each time you sustain this spell, the target takes mental damage with a basic will save and becomes encumbered. However, any critical success means the spell ends and can no longer be sustained. Encumbered is an extremely rare condition to put on a spell. However, it is a good condition. Clumsy 1 and a -10-foot status penalty to speed. That means they're easier to hit and they're slower. However, this is a mental spell, so it won't work on things like constructs and mindless undead. As such, I'm giving this spell a B. It's good, but doesn't work on all creatures. Overall, I'm giving the Introspection domain a B. Its spells are good, but they have some downsides. But now we get to go back to a really good domain with the Knowledge domain. With Scholarly Recollection, if you're about to roll Perception to Seek or a Recall Knowledge check with a skill that you're trained in, you can use a reaction to have the GM roll that check twice and take the better result. Recall Knowledge is one of the most important skill actions you will ever use, and this gives you advantage on it, which is nuts. Granted, it does take a focus point, but that may be worth it. A+ spell here. Moving on, we also have Know the Enemy. As a reaction, if you roll initiative and can see a creature, succeed in an attack roll against a creature, or a creature fails a saving throw against one of your spells, you can use a Recall Knowledge action and roll twice and take the better results. This spell is just a better version of Scholarly Recollection, as you can use this spell immediately upon rolling initiative, or if you happen to hit a creature or they fail a saving throw against one of your spells. Flat out amazing spell here, another A+. And of course, this domain does have an apocryphal spell, Wordsmith. With this spell, you can touch one document that was written by a single creature and it is comprised of text written in a single language. The language of the text shifts to a language that you know. This doesn't change the text context beyond minor translation differences, and it doesn't allow you to understand the original language the text was in. This one gets a B. It's situational, but if you need to read a text that's in a language you don't know, this is a great spell to have. But other than that, you're not going to use this spell very often, which is why this spell gets a B. Overall, in my book, the Knowledge Domain gets an A+. The two spells you're probably going to get if you pick this domain are really good, especially if you're focused on Recall Knowledge. And even if you're not, Recall Knowledge is a good third action to you. I would highly recommend this domain if you have access to it. If you worship Iori or a similar deity, pick up this domain. For the Lightning Domain, we've got Charged Javelin. Make a spell attack roll against a target within 60 feet. This spell, of course, deals electricity damage and persistent electricity damage. As long as the target is taking persistent damage from this spell, creatures get a +1 status bonus to attack rolls made with metal weapons and electricity effects against the target. They also take a -1 status penalty to saving throws against electricity effects. This one gets a B. If you've got allies with metal weapons, this is great. And it's even better if more than one party member has electricity effects. However, if you don't have any of those, then this is just a damaging spell. However, the chances of somebody having a metal weapon is pretty high. So overall, it's a good spell. However, Bottle the Storm isn't a great spell. As a reaction, if you would take electricity damage, you can gain resistance 10 to that damage. If you prevent damage in this way, then anytime during the next minute, you can release that damage at a target. This requires a single action with the attack trait and a melee spell attack roll, if the target is adjacent, or a ranged spell attack roll if they're not. If you cast this spell again before the duration expires, or you do not make this attack, the charge dissipates harmlessly. This spell just has way too many requirements. First of all, it requires your reaction. Second, it requires you to get hit with an electricity effect. And third, it requires a spell attack roll. And it only works on you. I'm giving this spell a C. The resistance is good for keeping you up, but only if you're taking electricity damage. So overall, an okay spell, but not great. Overall, I'm giving the Lightning Domain a B-. That first spell is good in most situations, but that second one is just okay, not great. Okay, time to talk about the Luck Domain. Starting with a Bit of Luck. This spell targets one willing creature within 30 feet. Anytime during the next minute, if the target would make a saving throw, it can roll twice and take the better result. Once it does so, the spell ends. In addition, once a creature has been targeted by Bit of Luck, it is immune for 24 hours. Allowing any creature to roll twice and take the better result on a saving throw is pretty insane. Granted, these are domain spells and they are focus spells, which means that this does require a focus point. However, this can be the difference between an ally staying up and getting knocked out, which is a big deal. This spell definitely gets an A. Then, of course, we gotta talk about Lucky Break. As a reaction, if you fail but don't critically fail a saving throw, you can re-roll that saving throw. However, you then become immune to this spell for 10 minutes. This one gets a B. It's good, but since it only targets you and uses up your reaction and a focus point, Bit of Luck is significantly better. Overall, I'm giving the Luck Domain a B+. It's got good spells, but that second one only works on you, which in my opinion doesn't make it as good as the first spell, Bit of Luck. Okay, we're almost done, but we gotta talk about the Magic Domain. Starting with Magic's Vessel. You can touch one creature and give it a +1 status bonus to saving throws. You can sustain this spell for up to 1 minute. However, every time you cast a spell from your spell slots, you automatically sustain this spell as well. In addition, you also grant the target resistance to damage from spells equal to the spell's rank until the start of your next turn. This spell is amazing. First, it's fantastic action economy, because you get to basically sustain the spell for free by casting the spell you would have cast anyway. Unfortunately, this doesn't work on cantrips, because it has to come from your spell slots, but I am still definitely giving this spell an A+. The only thing holding this spell back is that it is a touch spell. So you do have to be adjacent to your target in order to cast this spell. Unless, of course, you have reach spell or something like that. And, of course, we gotta talk about Mystic Beacon, another great spell. Target one willing creature within 30 feet. Until the start of your next turn, the next damaging or healing spell that the target casts deals damage or restores hit points as if it were one rank higher than its actual rank. This only applies to the initial damage or healing and not any ongoing effects. The spell otherwise functions as its actual rank. Once the target casts the spell, this spell ends. The best use of this spell is with the healing effect, especially with the heal spell, but this can be useful for attack spells as well. Especially if the enemy happens to be weak to the spell that the target of this spell casts. Fantastic spell here. Definitely A+. You probably saw this coming, but the magic domain gets an A+ as well. If you worship Nethys or Urgathoa or a similar deity, you want this domain. And the last domain for this video is the metal domain. First we have Serrate. You can touch one metal weapon and make it deal an additional 1d4 slashing damage until the start of your next turn. While this does seem like just extra damage, it's a little bit more than that. Number one, this works on any metal weapon, which means you could use it on something like a Morningstar and it would do slashing damage in addition to bludgeoning and piercing, which would help a lot against resistances. Second, this is any weapon you can touch, which means you can use it on your allies' weapons. I'm giving Serrate a C+. At the end of the day, it is just more damage, but it can help against resistances. Next, we've got Repel Metal. As a reaction, if a strike with a metal weapon or projectile would hit you or an ally within 60 feet, you can grant that target a +2 bonus on their AC against that attack. If the attack misses, you then direct the attack back at the attacker, who compares their own attack roll against their own AC. The target is then immune to this spell for 10 minutes. I personally think this spell is pretty hilarious, because it literally means that they are getting hit by their own attack. However, this only works on metal weapons, which means if that ogre is using something like a great club, you're not going to be able to use this spell. Or if you're facing something like an animal that has natural attacks, which there are a lot of in this game. Overall, I am giving this spell a C+, because it is good in the right situation. However, if you're not in the right situation, it's basically completely useless. Overall, I'm giving metal a C+. How good this domain is really depends on what kind of enemies you're running into. Okay, so I was asked by one of my viewers to do a graph of what domains are where. So I'm going to do that for this video and my last domain video as well. So the A+ are Dreams, Knowledge, and Magic. The A's are Darkness, Family, and Healing. And the A- are Abomination, Delirium, and Indulgence. As for the B's, at B+, we've got Cities, Cold, Confidence, Freedom, and Luck. For our regular B's, we've got Creation, Earth, Introspection, and Dust. And for B-, we've got Air, Ambition, and Lightning. For C+, we've got Destruction and Metal. The regular C's are Change, Duty, Fate, Fire, and Glyph. No C- yet. However, we do have a couple of D's. Death and Decay. This gets us about halfway through all the domains. So, a couple more videos for you guys coming up. If you guys enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. You can also check out my Patreon page for exclusive perks, including Google Sheets for my teamwork builds and all my videos early. Or if you just want my videos early, you can become a member of this channel. If you haven't seen my first domain video, you can check it out right here. Thank you guys so much for watching, and remember, teamwork is vital. It helps us solve problems.